What's up? It's Joshua, and I just saw this thing about like 3 weeks ago. Bishop Barron, historical proof that the Shroud of Turin is really Jesus and whatever. Look, I can historically prove that Jesus didn't exist or he's Satan, right? I mean, there's only one time that's how you guys created Anno Domino. Pontius Pilate dies at 37 A.D. This is how the Vatican came up with Anno. This is a monk, like 500 A.D. invented Anno Domino. This is how he came up with it. Because in Christianity, you guys always put Easter on a Friday. Passover isn't always on a Friday. So you had to sacrifice the lamb on the first day of Passover. Is when you sacrifice the lamb. It's an 8 day. It's an 8 day. That's why Jesus has to be crucified on Friday, or else the other bullshit that they made up doesn't exist. Passover is always on the 14th of Nisan. That's not always on a Friday. It moves around. It's not always on a Friday, right? So he went back. He went back to like astronomical records, right? To find. Well, he didn't even really have to do that because the Jews keep detailed dates of everything. Everything. The Jews write everything down. So he could just go to the Jewish calendar and look when Passover fell on a Friday around that time, around the time of Pontius Pilate. That's all he would have to do. He didn't have to look, because it said, like AI Gemini was like, hey, when they looked at the astrological, he didn't have to do that because the Jews have a calendar. So you can go back to the Jewish calendar and be like, okay, when Pontius Pilate dies at 37 AD, right? At one time during Pontius Pilate's reign of governorship, did Passover, the beginning of Passover, fall on a Friday? And you can look it up. And you know when they found it? 33 AD, right? Jesus is 33 years old when he dies. It says it in the scripture. So he said, well, if that's when the Passover was on a Friday, when Pontius Pilate was the governor, this is the time of the crucifixion. Plus it says 33 years, so he went back 33 years from that and made Anno Domino the first day Jesus' birth. Right? That's how they came up with it. Because Jesus has to be crucified on a Friday, because that's when the Passover lamb gets killed. It's on a Friday at the beginning of Passover. Passover rotates around. It's not just on a Friday like the Christian. It's always on a Friday. No, Passover isn't always on a Friday. It doesn't always start on a Friday. It's Nisan 14th, so they went back to the Jewish calendar. Look, Pontius Pilate dies when he's 37. 37 AD is when Pontius Pilate dies. And they went and they looked and they go, when was Passover on during Pontius Pilate's reign in the Jewish calendar on a Friday? Oh, 33 AD. Jesus is 33 years old. They took it back. And then all of a sudden, about 75 years later, they probably figured it out. And they're like, oh no, King Herod died 4 years before that. Duh. And then they started making up this Josephus stuff. And they probably changed stuff around and created John the Baptist and moved some other stuff around and started doing the hokey pokey with Christianity. Because they're like, one of the two's got to be false. Either Jesus wasn't crucified, or King Herod went chasing him after him, and Gabriel didn't come, and Hail Mary full great. Either way, you guys are liars. It's not the book of truth, right? That's how they came out. The Vatican itself invented it. That's how they dated it. It's written scripture. Pontius Pilate washed his hands. Jesus dies at 33. Go to the Jewish calendar. Look up when was Passover on a Friday, because it's got to be on Friday. That's when it is. Jesus dies at 33. Goes back. It is. Like I was listening to this rabbi talk. This is not science. You can't go look at historical. Yeah, I can. That's what it says. That's when Pontius Pilate was alive. That's when the Friday was. This is what it says. Jesus died at 33. I don't need to have faith. It says King Herod was chasing after him. King Herod dies 4 years before that. This isn't like he was talking. This rabbi was talking about this fire. He's like, well, there's all these soldiers. No, there would be a date when King Herod died. But let's even get beyond that. You know how there's another problem? with the story of Jesus Christ. First of all, go read the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are dated like 200 years before Jesus. It's the story of Jesus. So apparently the story had been going around for a long time. Whatever. Let's not even get into that. In like 7 A.D., the Jews, led by Judas, uprise against the Romans in Israel and beat them. This is like, I don't know, what is that? 17 years? 17 or like what? 23 years before this event in Jerusalem. 23 years before this, the Jews have rose up against the Roman army and beat them. That's probably why they sent Pontius Pilate. It's after Herod dies, right? Then you have Jesus, who's supposedly the friend of all the people, and the only one who's against him is the rabbis, right? Goes before all the people, and they all say, yell, crucify him. I thought he was the champion of the people. Why would they all of a sudden be siding with the rabbis? I thought everybody was against the rabbis. Now everybody's siding with the rabbis against Jesus? What, he jumped Satan into all of them too because he can control Satan? But the other problem is Pontius Pilate goes, is this your king? And they say, we have no king but Caesar. The Jews would never say that. Just 23 years before this, they rose up against the Romans. All of a sudden, 23 years. For the Hebrews and the Israelites been rising up for like 3,000 years. All of a sudden, this one little incident, they're like, Caesar's our king. They would have never said that. And the other thing is, Jews keep to each other. All this went down. It's not written down in any Jewish history anywhere. He went before the Sanhedrin. And they went before Pilate, and there was this big thing in Jerusalem, and King of the Jews, and none of them wrote it down. It wasn't written down by one scribe. It wasn't written down until a bunch of so-called whatever fishermen wrote it down in Greek. Like, I guess 100 years later or whatever. 60, 70, 80 years later. Nobody wrote it down. There were no scribes. There were no scribes at the court of Pilate. He went before the high priest. You know how big of a deal that is to go before the high priest? The high priest himself. The high priest went to Pilate, went to Caesar. Nobody wrote that down. That didn't make any sense because the Romans made that shit up, and that's how the Romans looked at everything. The Jews don't act like that. It's not. What, all of a sudden the Jews just changed every way that they were. Well, we have the shot of Torah.